Good morning, good afternoon, dear sister. I'm very glad to welcome you to this international panel within the TUC Women's Conference 2022. I am Paola Simonetti, and I'm the director of the Equality Department at the International Trade Union Confederation. And I would like to thank immediately the TUC for inviting me and engaging the ITUC in this important event and discussion, which actually is going to be on lessons from the women winning in the state, street, and workplace. So this will be an important discussion where our distinguished speakers will lead us through the global scenario on what the trade unions and women are winning around the world. And also it will be very important to inspire our action in sharing experiences and lessons learned in this important arena, which is indeed about justice, safety, and equality. And these are major engagement that are actually in line with our what we call the new social contract. The new social contract elements that the ITUC and the global labor movement are actually upholding globally in order to have a sustainable recovery and resilience. So the element of the new social contract are indeed based on decent work, so the creation of jobs, climate-friendly jobs, in key economic sectors like the green sector or the care sectors, where of course we know that the women are the majority in terms of workforce. Of course, rights in line with the ILO Centenary Declaration, so rights and protection for all workers, including occupational health and safety. Wages, we talk about minimum living wages, very relevant when it comes to women workers. Universal social protection, including a global fund for the poorest countries, and then of course equality and inclusion that are at the forefront of international labor movement demands, and we say they are at the basis of the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. So non-discrimination, equal pay for equal work or equal values, the elimination of gender-based violence and harassment, investments in care once again. This is really at the foundation of justice, safety, and equality, and a sustainable recovery with women participation. So allow me just a few minutes also to express all our solidarity to peace, dialogue, and democracy in Ukraine. We are living in a terrible situation. We are, witnessing a terrible moment for our sisters and brothers in Ukraine. And let me express, our support and our demand for the war to be ended and for peace, dialogue, and democracy to be restored for our sisters and brothers in Ukraine. And the ITUC stands in their support. We have launched solidarity initiatives. Next week, the ITUC will participate in a march here in Brussels, and all our hearts are with them. So back to our important panel and back to our important discussion today. We have 4 great speakers. And I would like to introduce them. They will share again their examples of their action that they are taking at national level. From Spain, of course, we know that Spain, the Spanish government actually is
actually implementing legislative advances that improves women's rights. And we have the pleasure to have with us Barbara Tardon, who is the advisor to the Spanish Minister of Equality. Barbara is an expert in sexual violence and human rights and holds a PhD in interdisciplinary gender studies. She has worked in both government and for no-profit organization on projects across immigration and women's human rights. Welcome. Then we have from Poland, we have Nadia Oleszczuk. Hope I'm not mispronouncing your name too much. Nadia is an activist and trade union organizing for the rights of women and workers across casualization, parental leave, and abortion. So again, Nadia, we will hear from us your important experience. Then from Colombia, we have Victoria Sandino with us. Welcome, Victoria. She's a senator, and her political party was created as a result of the peace process and developed out of the former Revolutionary Armed Force of Colombia. So, Victoria, we will listen very attentively to your experience, which is really strong and important. And then finally, last but not least, my dear colleague from India, Manali. Manali Shah is the National Secretary of India SIWA, the Self-Employed Women's Association, and we know that SIWA is doing a very important and excellent work on the informal economy across the 18 states in India. So without any further ado, I would like to invite the speakers to also introduce themselves a little bit more if they see fit, and then go deep diving into their experience and their engagement at national level. So the speakers, I will invite the speakers to speak for about 10 minutes. And then we will have the possibility also for a short interaction, and I will invite the colleagues and the participants to paste their questions in the chat box. So we will have a first round of 10 minutes, and then you will have the possibility after the Q&A to have a last round to wrap up with the final considerations. So Barbara, now I really give the floor to you. So please, Barbara, you have the floor. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Paola.
Thank you, Paola. Good afternoon to my colleagues, sisters. Thank you to TUC for inviting the Ministry of Equality of Spain to participate in this important space and symbolic space. And also thank you to the interpreter, to Kat. I imagine it's very complicated to follow our rhythms to keep up with us in both languages. So I'm going to try to speak a little more slowly than I would normally speak. And so, Kath, if you have any questions or doubts, please stop me and I can repeat myself. So if it's okay, I'm going to get started. So first off, I'd like just to remind everyone that from the beginning of democracy in our country, in Spain, and after more than 40 years of a cruel dictatorship, the Spanish society, and specifically the political feminist movement in Spain, has played a fundamental role in the political agenda, in the social agenda, and obviously in the institutional agenda also of this country. And so in the consolidation of a democracy that is still imperfect, but is under ongoing construction process. So feminism and the feminist political moment, as our Minister of Equality has stated, Irene Montero, this is a societal project that strengthens and improves the countries, and obviously it also improves our democracies. So in the specific case of our country, of Spain, the feminist agenda, and obviously the agenda of the progressive governments during the last 40 years has sought to situate the struggle against violence against women, against our bodies, and that this is in the center of the regulations and political policies. It would not have been possible to do this without having a political and social consensus around these issues, and also from all the different parties and political groups. Even though I represent a progressive government and a feminist ministry and left-wing ministry, it's important to recognize that this country has laws, or framework law 2004, law 1 2004, which was approved in 2004, came out and was promoted, and thanks to a consensus among all the different political groups, both from the right and the left. This was a unanimous consensus that was signed in Parliament. And so today, and as we all know, the political context is changing, and this is the context in our country where we see the extreme right. The fascism is a constant threat for the rights of women and for the right of all women, not just Spanish citizens or citizens who reside in our country. So 18 years after this historic landmark of the approval of the framework law, and thanks to this coalition government, for those of you who don't have this information, we have a coalition government today between the most voted party, which is the Spanish Socialist Party, and then Unidas Podemos, United We Can. This was allowed for a recuperation of the Ministry of Equality after almost 7 years of a conservative government and ongoing cuts to women's rights and equality policies, and seen an increase in discrimination in all spaces. We were able to recover the Ministry of Equality with a strong commitment to return to place in the middle, in the center, in the heart of the country's institutional policies, the fight against all kinds of violence that are carried out against women in all spaces, in public spaces, in private spaces, in the workplace, and in all spaces where we interact and live as women. So since we started with the government, we're able to recover the Ministry of Equality. This was 2 years have gone by now. And since then, we have not stopped working. We are exhausted. It's important to say that we should name that all women who are part of the creation of policies and those who are not, we are exhausted. We all know it. We haven't rested, not even one day during the pandemic. Everyone knows the impact it has had on us as women, and we still haven't had time to rest. We are very aware of the denial threat from the extreme right, that is trying to, is an attack against the policies that we are trying to move forward from our ministry. So we can't say that this is not something that has been easy, but it's still important to say that we are very proud as a ministry of all the steps that we have been able to take for the last 2 years. These are obviously backed by other feminist policies and other public policies that have been designed by other governments and administrations that are also progressive and have a commitment to fight against sexist violence or violence against women. So the fight against violence is a central focus of the Ministry of Equality. And as I mentioned, we're trying to implement public policies, regulations, and we also are promoting specific measures for all working women, both in the space of preventing gender-based violence that is carried out in the workplace, as we all know that this is taking place, as well as this violence that is carried out against workers outside of the workplace. We all know that there are the huge costs, emotional burdens, physical, psychological costs that the systemic violence has generated against women in all the spaces where we have a presence. And so along these lines, in just the last minutes that I have, I'd like to focus on 3 measures that we are promoting from the Ministry of Equity and are currently implementing. These norms and public policies that protect the rights of workers who are victims of sexist violence, as well as the actions and measures that seek to guarantee the human rights to have a comprehensive recuperation and reparation in relation to the violence that's been experienced. And then the last point, which is essential, is having a budget, the allocation of funds, because we are not able to implement the other actions without the sufficient budget lines. So we have huge challenges, and sometimes it's kind of boring when we look at all these numbers and laws and names. So I can maybe share the information in more detail, but I would like to highlight the specific measures that are in state to protect the workers who are victims of gender-based violence. So we can say we see often a need to have geographic mobility, the suspension of labor contracts, the eradication of a work contract, the right to work completely or partially and remotely. There are other rights for the independent workers, such as benefits to be able to pay into Social Security, rights in relation to Social Security, as well as those benefits, rights that have to do with employment and labor insertion, with specific training programs for all women, and with the necessary incentives to begin different employment opportunities, and also the rights for public employees, as well as other economic rights. In the context of the pandemic, the Spanish government, as some of you know, they have approved the basic income, which all survivors of sexist violence are beneficiaries of. It's also important to talk about the imminent approval of the organic law for the comprehensive guarantees for sexual freedom. So currently in the last phase in Congress. We're hoping that finally next month it will be approved by Congress, and this incorporates a catalog of rights and measures that are focused on preventing and increasing awareness around the violence that is carried out against women in the workplace. And it has a whole chapter that seeks to guarantee economic autonomy, the rights of victims, and right to housing. I also want to make sure I mention one of the major opportunities of this time to protect victims' rights and women's rights. And there have been 3 major investments that are very important today and have been carried out by this ministry and have a direct impact on women's rights, the rights of women workers who have been victims of any kind of sexist violence. So we are going to be investing. We've already carried out the economic transfers with 66 million euros for over the next 3 years so each community, each of the autonomous communities will be able to implement a crisis center to address and respond to sexual violence. These are obligatory essential services, and so there needs to be centers for the victims of sexist violence. So there are already centers for those people who are victims of partner violence, but we will now have centers for victims of sexual violence due to the magnitude, the invisible sexual violence that's carried out oftentimes in the workplace. And so the first time since Spain has become a democracy, we are going to be implementing, will be signed and implemented at the end of March, the insertion plan for the victims of sexual trafficking and human trafficking, and for women who are in context of prostitution, with an investment of over 200 million euros. These are obviously public policies. These are investments that we'll have to evaluate when they are implemented over the next several years. And the next is the labor insertion plan. Just yesterday, we presented the strategic equality plan for men and women, which is 2022-2025 with specific focus. One is focused on the economy and having a just division of wealth. And another is the lives free of sexist violence for women. This, once again, has a huge budget line, and this has blown up the brains, the minds of the extreme right and people who are carrying out violence against women. So to conclude, I want to note that the state policies to prevent and eradicate violence against women must be a central strategy of a country, and they need to prevail in an independent way, regardless of who governs. The fight against gender-based violence and sexual violence, this is a question that is relevant for the state, because these are fundamental rights, because for this reason, and that's why in Spain, the Ministry of Equality will continue working to ensure that they always are central rights. And I want to close reminding us all of one of the important landmarks that took place just a few months ago. And this was the approval of the work reform, which will become effective on March 30th of this year, as well as a rider law, which was just recently approved. It was approved in 2021, and they will both be applied to women workers who are victims of any kind of sexist violence. Thank you once again. Thank you. And here we are available if you have any questions. Warm greetings and solidarity also for all of our colleagues in Ukraine. And our slogan will always be no to the war.
So thank you very much. What your government is doing is impressive. There is a long list, as you actually have explained, of very progressive, legislation, piece of legislation in support of women on violence and harassment, but also the new labor law that it's going to be implemented really soon, but also very concrete financial allocation. So it's not, only about policies, but also, adequate resources that are actually put in place in order to these policies to become a reality, and that it's really really important. So congratulations for all the great work. So let me go now to Nadia, who will give us the perspective of a trade union organizing work. So Nadia, please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My purpose today is to tell you about the Women's Strike Movement and Consultative Council. I have been working in the Women's Strike Movement since November 2020. I moderate the substantive work of the Employee Rights Team, and my role in the Council covers labor and social rights issues. In the Consultative Council, together with my team, of which I'm the leader, the only one in Poland that connects to union activists, experts in the field of the labor market, employees struggling with mobbing, for example. We have already developed a number of postulates responding to the instability of the labor market or combining care work for women with professional work. So to start with, after October 22nd, 2020, the fight for women's rights in Poland here became a symbol of the revolution. In the righteous anger that broke out at the prospect of virtually total ban of abortion, people living in Poland lost the right to terminate their pregnancy if the event of severe damage to the fetus. New common demands were born there then, and women of all ages, from girls to grandmothers, have joined peaceful protests to reclaim their rights. And the frustration of people living in Poland was so great in many areas: incompetence of the authorities in managing the crisis related to the pandemic, ineffective protection of the rights of workers, ineffective remote learning. Therefore, the postulates of the women's strike have been widened. And the first basic postulate of the Consultative Council is, of course, access to legal and free abortion for all people in need, and prohibitions on the implementation of reproductive rights affect primarily those who cannot afford the procedure and keep alive social inequalities in access to safe medical services. It is therefore important to link feminist demands to workers and social demands, I believe. And in order to make access to abortion a reality, the economic situation of women in Poland must improve. Women constitute the majority of the lowest paid jobs, mainly those related to caring, education, cleaning, or lower levels of administration, such as cleaners, librarians, caretakers for children, and elderly nurses. And overburdening with household duties is the main barrier to professional work activity of women here in Poland. And in addition, the inequality of earnings is in the same position in Poland at constant level for the last 20 years. And in addition, there is the underdevelopment of care institutions and the lack of guaranteed maternity leave. So we are here in a big swamp, I would say. And since then, the Team for Employee Rights has developed 3 sets of postulates concerning the most important spheres of life of female and also male employees. And the first one is caring work and reduction of working time. The second one is junk contracts and inequality. And the third one is right to strike. And the Employment Rights Team of the Consultative Council presented an extremely important set of caring demands, which is a response to the problems of female employees struggling with combining professional duties and unpaid work at home. And in all postulates, we refer to reproductive, domestic, and caring work that results in the biological reproduction of generations, protection of human health and life, but also activities related to the social functioning and development of both individuals and the entire society. And the data show that compared to the EU countries, we are in the group of 3-4 countries with the worst access to the nurseries and kindergartens. So in Poland has the resources of approximately 1,100 places in nurseries, but in most 71% communes there are no kindergartens or nurseries. And to sum up, the role of the council is to collect voices of protest, analyze them, and define the problems behind them, and then prepare specific legal solutions to the problem. And the council presents fast activist action, ideas for exerting pressure, and the broadcast solutions, strategic goals that are impossible today but can describe the place we want to live in the future. And our postulates and solutions are on the participation platform www.lumio.org/osk, where they can be consulted with protesters. And the purpose of the council's work is to answer the question of why people are protesting still in Poland, what can be done and how to do it. And the long-term goal is to shift the system towards bottom-up policy making where society co-rules the state. And the product of the council's work is a list of things to do that the protesters are demanding from the government and also the opposition. Because as we believe, governments are supposed to act in the service of people. So thank you very much for invitation. That's all for me.
Thank you very much, Nadia, and thanks for the great work that indeed you are doing. So I would like now to invite Victoria to step in and also to share her experience in Colombia, and also as a peace negotiator, also that led work to embed the gender and equality focus in the peace agreement. So please, Victoria, you have the floor.
Por favor.
Paola, muchas gracias.
Paola, thank you so much. Thank you and welcome. Greetings to all the panelists. I'm very excited to be with you and to listen to Barbara. It's a dream of all the women in the world, I think, to have clear public policies that ensure a guarantee of equity and to have the adequate budgets to actually implement those policies. And also, listening to Nadia, I understand that your struggle is part of the fight of women around the world. And in our case, it's important to say, Nadia, that we just achieved in Colombia a very important step forward that wasn't possible to do this in Congress of Republic, which I'm a part of, but we were able to achieve this right through a constitutional court ruling. And this was the decriminalization of abortion up to 24 weeks of pregnancy. And so this is a huge success, a huge landmark for the women of our country. And this is an invitation for all the women in the world that this struggle that saves lives, that it is essential. So I'm going to share with you all today a little about the experience that we've had, that I've had personally. And I'm going to start by knowing that Colombia is experiencing a very special moment. You could say we're in an electoral period. Just this coming Sunday, we have elections for Congress. And then a month from now, we have the presidential, or the first round of the presidential elections. And so just 5 years ago, in this same context, we saw the signing of the peace agreement. It's a peace agreement that seeks to transform our country. And this includes, among other things, incorporation for the first time, a gender perspective in a peace agreement, which is really no more than recognizing the disproportionate impact that the armed conflict has had on the lives of women, and to recognize the rights of these women within the context of the peace agreement. And so this achievement was obtained in the negotiation tables in Havana through the Gender Subcommission, which I was coordinating in the name, obviously, of all the insurgent women. So, Kat, I just wanted to mention that if I'm going too fast, let me know. I'll slow down if I need to. Oh, okay, so I think I'm okay. So just through this struggle with the signing of the peace agreement, we began to carry out work from the regions, from the rural areas, where we are incorporating the voices of women with their proposals for the agreement. And this is a relationship that we have been able to strengthen over the years, both in the incorporation of a gender perspective, as well as the implementation of the peace agreement in a comprehensive way. And so with all the other reivindication and struggles, the women have been present. From the diversity of women in our country, with the different agendas of the women of our country. And once again, we have a diversity of women. We have rural peasant women. We have ethnic communities and indigenous, Black women who are student and youth, feminists, a wide variety. And so we have come together with a national platform of women for the grassroots Women for Peace and Territory, with the aim of being able to include all the struggles of women through this platform, this coalition. This is a very broad and inclusive coalition where we are fighting against patriarchy, against racism, against capitalism and fascism, in defense of our territory, for peace with social justice, which has the main objective of fighting for a dignified life for women. So there we have confronted many kinds of gender-based violence, racial violence, and class violence. We are an active part also of the social mobilizations, such as those that we saw in 2021. We had massive protests, and we have also participated in the social mobilizations that led to the decriminalization of abortion, as I mentioned earlier, as I just mentioned. This is something that's very new, and it's a huge achievement for women in our country. And maybe one of the most important points of our coalition is the defense of the peace agreement, which once again was signed 5 years ago. It was signed in 2016, and this is our dream, essentially. However, 5 years after the signing of the peace agreement, we have seen that its implementation is currently in crisis. The advances in implementation have been minimal, and there have been many obstacles, such as the modifications to the signed agreement. This has been carried out by the national government, and also a fragmentation of the agreement itself. So, we could say, one piece over here might be implemented, but there's huge delays in, the implementation of a huge part of the agreement. And so this is a huge risk for peace and the integrity of those of us who laid down our weapons to become a part of civilian life and political life, and to carry out our struggles on the streets and in Congress and other scenarios. So for example, the land policy, which, the land is something that's behind the creation of the armed conflict in our country. We see that there has not been the establishment of the public policy, also in relation to political participation, and the guarantees for social protest has been violated by the state security forces. And we see this through the murder of individuals, rape of women, in addition to the beatings that we have seen, mass beatings in the social protests. We also have very painful numbers. We have more than 1,400 men and women social leaders, human rights defenders, in addition to 311 individuals, signatories of the peace, who have been murdered since the signing of the peace agreement. And so just to mention, just in the last 2 years, we have had 207 massacres that have taken place throughout our country. And also, this situation impacts the lives of women, because this has become the bandera of the struggle for peace for us as women, specifically from the rural areas and the regions. It's also important to recognize that the pandemic intensified the situation for women, specifically in relation to violence, poverty, and an increased work burden. This is the unpaid work carried out, the care work carried out by women in the home. UN Women talks about the fact that during the pandemic, there was an increase of unpaid care work that is mostly carried out by women. And it is estimated that in 2022, this represented 20% of the country's GDP. And that on average, there was a 2-hour increase in the workload for women compared to that of men. So this means that a woman today in Colombia, on average, is working 15 hours a day, of which more than half of that time is dedicated to unpaid care work. This is a very, very serious situation. So for that reason, from the coalition and the fulfillment of one of our important struggles, which is the eradication of oppression and opposing inequality that women suffer in addition to gender-based violence, we have been working in coordination together with myself as a senator to promote different laws that I will share with you all. And then if you want further information, please let me know. But I'm just going to briefly give an overview of these different legislative proposals that have been promoted by the women's movement and the women from the coalition that I'm a member of. So one of the bills is the promotion of measures to favor employment for young women, because in our country, the employment is 30% for this population group. Another is the superation of obstacles to access contraception methods, because the issue of undesired pregnancies or abortion or the voluntary interruption of a pregnancy, this means that there needs to be guarantees which are access to contraception. We've also created a proposal or a bill that has to do with the vital income, a basic income, which is access to the universal basic income, as Barbara has mentioned. There's something that does not exist yet in our country, but we hope will shortly. Another is pension reform that has to do with the signatories of the peace agreement and their possibility to access protections for people who are at risk. So, for example, in my case, another bill that I think is very positive is the menstrual license for girls and adolescents and women within the education system, which also has a mandate to include also working women. There's another bill that is focused on individuals with disabilities so they can have a full autonomy and have access, both these women and their caretakers, to have a basic income. And this is because a majority of the care providers for people who have different disabilities are also women. We also have a national health plan for the rural areas, which is part of a much more broader peace bill that will be presented shortly, that has to do with access to health care for the residents of the Colombian rural countryside. Also, we're working on a political reform that will increase the opening of democracy and increase of political participation for society, and true representation and guarantees for women to be able to have political participation in these different decision-making spaces. So I think in general, these are, once again, just some of the initiatives that are currently being presented in Congress. Some of them, there are two initiatives that are already in their second debate and are moving forward. But these are different initiatives that have 4 different debates in Congress. And so some of them are currently in the second debate phase. And we hope that the congressional representatives, specifically the women congressional representatives, because I won't be there in the future, that they can continue promoting these bills and these very important initiatives so that they can become law. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, TUC, for including me, the TUC for including me in this space. Thank you, Mariela, who has invited us to participate in this very important space today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, gracias, Victoria. On this peace package, el paquete de paz that you have actually very well described and also underlined how important is to engage and include women in this peace agreement, and how this actually does make the difference. So thank you again. And with this, let me actually call on my colleague Manali from SIWA. Manali, of course, the work of SIWA is very well known on the on the informal economy, but also on the care economy. Most recently, you have been really engaging in there. So we really would like to hear from you what are the priorities of your organization in India, and also the strategies that are pursuing and the ambition. Thank you very much, Manali.
You have the floor. You're muted, Manali. You're muted. Thanks.
Thank you, Paula, and thank you, TUC, for giving me this opportunity. So we have just celebrated Women's Day, and wishing you all the happy Women's Day. Women denotes many things, a mother, a sister, a wife, and many more relationships. But in all this relationship, her key role as a worker is lost. The women herself, the government, and all the stakeholders, employers, contractors, have overlooked women's identity as the worker. So SEWA, at SEWA, we are a central trade union, national trade union, and one of the largest women workers movement was formed with this very thing to provide voice, visibility, and validation to the women workers of informal sector. We were established in 1972 with the twin goals of full employment and self-reliance. Full employment means work security, income security, social security, at least social security, at least healthcare, childcare, insurance, and shelter. And the last security is food security. Self-reliance means that the women workers should be collectively and independently autonomous. In India, 93% of the total workforce are from the informal economy, out of which 50% of the workers are self-employed. Today, 2.1 million women workers from 18 states of India have joined us in the women's labor movement, making it stronger and stronger every day. But let me tell you that it's not easy. Even today, our leaders and organizers have to explain to the women repeatedly that they are workers, along with being wife, mother, and that they are contributing to the economy. Our struggle started with creating awareness amongst women workers of her identity as the worker and her contribution to the economy. But now, Our women workers members are aware of their identity as the worker and are empowered to negotiate for the rights with different stakeholders. There are 260 million, let me talk about the home workers. There are 260 million home-based workers worldwide. It represents 7.9% of the global employment, and 56% of them, that is 147 million, are women. Home workers in South Asia are 67.5 million, out of which 41.85 million are in India. That constitutes 9% of the total employment in India. Home-based trades are predominated by women and children. Their homes are their workplace and they are invisible. I would like to recall here the struggle for home-based workers. When we first approached the Labour Commissioner in my state for the proper payment of wages and wage increase for the BD workers, BD rollers, it's a local, BD is it's a mini cigarette. We were told that they just pass the time at home. They are not the workers, and they started our fight for the home-based workers that led to ILO Convention 177 home worker on homework. We were the first one to coin the word home-based workers. But where are we today? Only few countries have ratified the ILO Convention 177 on home workers. Most of them not. There are long global supply chains in the home-based trades, and the women workers are at the lowest. The wages decrease at each and every step, but skills and technology does not trickle down, leaving these workers in perpetual debt. The condition of these home-based workers have deteriorated further in pandemic as the global supply chain were stopped, affected, and were apprehended that it will take long time to restore the supply chains, making the home-based workers more vulnerable. We need to get together and fight for this decent livelihood for home-based workers. Being a women's movement, we have always strived towards economic freedom of the women. Our founder, Ela Bhatt, always called economic freedom is the second freedom. Let me share you our struggle for women's street vendors. In India, according to one estimate, 2.5% of the city's population are street vendors. More than 50% are women. In India, street vending is time immemorial, and they provide like food, fruits, vegetables at affordable rates to the public at large. They usually congregate at one place, that is natural market. Natural market have organically evolved because of mutual needs and of demand and supply. For example, fruits and vegetables near residential areas, toys and eatables near parks, and etc. But sadly, they are evicted, beaten up, fined, and their wares destroyed or confiscated, and the natural markets are not considered into the development plan of city. We struggle hard to protecting the rights of the women street vendors related to life and livelihood. The right to life and livelihood is fundamental right enshrined under the Constitution of India. It was our fight for the public place. We call the struggle from Manek Chowk to Vijay Chowk. Chowk means a marketplace in midst of the cities. Manek Chowk is the busiest market marketplace in my city, from where our struggle started in 1972, and it ended in Vijay Chowk, where Parliament is situated in our capital, Delhi, where the Street Vendors Protection of Livelihood and Regulation of Street Vending Act 2014 was passed. We first filed a case for 313 women street vendors of Manek Chowk Natural Market in the Supreme Court of India to establish the right to vend. After 7 years of hearing, we won, and for the first time, right to vend was established in India. But still, the evictions continue. Fines and penalties were levied. We advocated for the national policy for the street vendors. It was the first step towards protection of livelihood of street vendors. It also established our right on public space. On the other hand, we advocated with the police and the municipal authorities, city council, that the harassment of women street vendors in the natural markets by police and other authorities should be stopped, and the confiscation of the perishable items should be immediately stopped. It was our first major victory. We were able to stop harassment, violence at the workplace way back in 1980s. Thereafter, national policy for the street vendors came into force. We were the part of task force set up for this by the government. This was a second victory for us, recognizing of the right to carry livelihoods. But unfortunately, it was not implemented as is lacked the legal backing. Then we advocated for the national law for the street vendors for protecting the regulating their livelihood. The central government was not keen to form such an act. They felt that it is the matter of state government and only state can frame the act. But we apprehended that it will depend on the will of state to enact the act. We continue our struggle for enacting the national law for street vendors. We took our big rally in 2014 in our capital, and our street vendors went on hunger strike. We continuously lobbied with the spokesperson of the political parties. As the parliament was in session, in the morning, we used to advocate with the members of parliament, and we attended the parliament continuously, and ultimately, when we were in the parliament, a national law, the Street Vendors Protection of Livelihood and Regulation of Street Vending Act 2014 was enacted. It was unanimously passed by both the houses of parliament. It was the first ever act for protecting the livelihood of the self-employed workers. We had, in fact, played a major role in drafting the act. The definition of the natural market explained earlier was given by us. We introduced the concept of natural market and right over public space, which was provided for in the act. This was the overwhelming victory for us. After a battle of almost 2 decades, we were able to establish the right to livelihood that was enshrined in our constitution. Though we were able to provide license and identity cards to the street vendors. We consider license and identity card as an asset for women workers because they provide much needed voice and visibility to the workers, to the invisible, poor, and vulnerable women street vendors. Our struggle did not end there. We were able to convince our government, Ministry of Labor and Employment, to consider the street vendors as self-employed workers and to constitute a social security board for them and provide social security to the workers. We have adopted a joint approach of struggle and development in SEVA. Struggle through organizing and development through building the cooperatives. SEVA Street Vendors members also formed a cooperative and brought a shop. I remember the shop number 40 in the wholesale vegetable market. 140 shops belong to a big traders, and we were proud that our poor women street vendors cooperative own a shop in the market. We had entered the mainstream. Our rural members were small farmers and agriculture workers who grew vegetables. We tied them to the street vendors through the shop number 40. It was a win-win situation for both our agriculture members and vendors. The street vendors suffered much in the current pandemic. They could not earn livelihood in past 2 years because of lockdowns, partial lockdowns, night curfews, and other restrictions. The police and city council saw the vendors as the super spreaders and cleared them off. They have incurred debts and survival is a question. Our women street vendors showed strength even in this crisis. The municipal authorities approach us with the concept of e-rickshaw to supply fresh fruits and vegetables, milks, and other necessities in the quarantine, containment, and red zone areas. Our women street vendors took up the challenge, drove e-rickshaws, and supply fresh fruits and vegetables, milk, and other necessities in the quarantine, containment, and red zone area fearlessly. They are also the true warriors. It was a major victory for us. Summing it up, we need to be together. Organizing is our key strength. We have to show our collective strength to win our battles. Our struggles are always truthful and peaceful. Though value-based organizing and following nonviolence, honesty, truthfulness, we have made many achievements for rights of our workers' strength. Unity is our strength. Thank you.
Thank you, Manali. It's indeed, an impressive work again that you are doing with Siwa in India. And of course, you have stressed the issue of home-based workers, which is, of course, central, but also all the work that you have done to secure social security and social protection to the street vendors in this case, as you were saying, which is indeed, social protection is a global it's a global good, so it's really fundamental also to support resilience in that sense. So recovery and resilience. So it's really a key engagement area that to be working on as trade unions and to fight for it. And you are doing really a remarkable work in that sense. So, dear panelists, we are a little bit late with the timing, but I guess that there was, the participants and who is listening, is really enjoying all the, the great experience that you have been able to share. So at this point in time, maybe I would just do a last round, but really 1 minute, 2 minutes each, just because we don't have we need to wrap up. Asking you final thoughts. You have been listening, to each other, and with such of a wealth of knowledge and experience. I will just to give you the chance to give you one final thought. We have listened to, the policy on the engagement on the policy change, Barbara was really, referring to that, but also organizing, Manali, but also, the role of women, Nadia and Victoria more widely. So what is, your final thought, to foster, women participation, and also maybe for the trade unionists to get, more young women into our movement. So up to you again. I don't know who would like to start. Can I call for volunteer? Nadia, you're smiling. I'm choosing you. Please.
So thank you. So I think that listening to amazing, inspiring women, I am more and more convinced that we need more young women in unions, and trade unions need more women. In Poland, the average age of a trade unionist is 47. There are no women and young women in labor unions, and I believe it will be a big change. And so young women also want to be very active and fight for their rights, as we can see in Poland in the women's strike movement. So we need to give them a voice, sometimes encourage them a little and give them self-confidence, because unfortunately in Poland, young women who say what they think are discriminated. So to sum up, I think that we need more women and young women in labor unions.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Nadia. Who would like to go next? Manali, please.
So thank you, Paola. So I think as our body needs the blood, and like that, union needs new blood. So we need more and more young women to take over the union movement. So, but let me share with you that in Seva we have second and third generation of our members, but still, so we need more youth in the union. I totally agree with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Manali. It's a clear demand and clear ask also from your side. So maybe Victoria, por favor.
Sí, para dejar a Bárbara que cierre.
Yes, we can maybe have Barbara close for us. But I'd like to say that all of the experiences that we have shared with you today are incredible experiences, really positive experiences. And at least ourselves, from the coalition, we have a practice that I think has allowed us to advance a lot, is that we have women from the trade union movement, we have women who are from the countryside, we have women from the cities, we have university students, we have academics. I think the strength that we have in this group of women, and also, like myself, women who have signed the peace agreement, and I'm a senator for the time being, but this force of being able to call for the participation of all these women amid our diversity means that we all have hope in all of our struggles, and we can support each other in all the diversity of our struggles. And we need to be in the streets, part of social protests. Often, many of us were out in the streets on March 8th demanding our rights, but we also have to carry out actions in Congress, and we need to ensure that there's a true commitment from the next administration, because our current administration was not interested in transforming the lives and the well-being and implementing the peace agreement. So I think what you have all shared is very inspiring and allows us to move forward with energy. Thank you so much.
Barbara, por favor. Gracias.
Thank you, Victoria. And Barbara, it's your turn. Thank you. It's been very inspiring to hear you all. As someone who represents the government, I just want to note that governments must fulfill and make effective women's human rights, and also the women workers who are, in the end, all of us are women workers, whether we're in this home or in public spaces. So the governments and the states must work together with a feminist movement and civil society, such as the trade unions, to have a monitoring or oversight to ensure that the commitments are implemented. And as I mentioned, there's nothing more international than the feminist movement. This is internationalism really in the skin. So thank you so all.
Thank you all to the great speakers for their great intervention. I just would like also to highlight that the ITUC will launch very soon a new renewed program on women in leadership. So we the demands also from our affiliates is well received and well heard, and this is of course one of the key priorities for the international trade union movement that we'd also retained and embedded in our next World Congress at the end of the year. So thank you very much. Let me thank you the speakers, the sisters and brothers that are listening to us, and let me hand back to Jane for the closing and accompanying the other for the rest of the day. Thank you very much.